Some stories begin with glory, with parades, medals, cheers, and promises of everlasting brotherhood. They are tales told in town squares and history books, polished to a bright sheen, where the lines between hero and villain are as clear as a summer sky. But this story begins in the dark. Not the gentle dark of a quiet night, but a consuming, gritty dark that settles in the lungs and stains the soul. It begins in a part of the world where mountains tear open the sky with jagged, unforgiving peaks, where the dust is a fine red powder that never truly settles, clinging to skin, weaponry, and hope alike. It is a place where men, stripped of the comforts of home, learn the profound weight of silence. A silence that isn't peaceful but heavy, a void that swallows laughter, trust, and sometimes the very truth about the people you thought you could count on. It is in this crucible of rock and despair that Staff Sergeant Alex Carter, an American soldier who had built his life upon the bedrock of duty, honor, and loyalty above all things, learned a brutal, earth-shattering lesson. That the people closest to you, the ones who share your rations and your fears, are the ones who can cut the deepest wounds. And it is also in this godforsaken place, amidst the rubble of his faith, that he met the one soul who understood his pain without a single word. A scrawny, scarred stray dog, a creature as discarded and forsaken as he was. Together they would forge a bond in the fires of betrayal and desolation, a pact of mutual survival, and they would survive what neither could have escaped alone. This is their story. Alex Carter was a soldier bred, not made. The military wasn't just a career path. It was a family legacy, a sacred tradition. His father, a stern but proud man with a chest full of Vietnam-era ribbons, had served. His older brother, Michael, had his picture on the mantelpiece in dress blues, a faint, serious smile on his face just before his first deployment to Iraq. Alex grew up not with fairy tales, but with stories of courage whispered over hot chocolate. Stories of sacrifice, of mud and monsoons, of brothers in arms who would share their last canteen of water, their last letter from home, and who would, without a second thought, die for one another if necessary. That belief was the cornerstone of his identity. It carried him through the brutal monotony of boot camp, the bone-deep exhaustion of his first deployment, and the heart-pounding terror of every firefight that followed. He wasn't a reckless warrior. He was a thoughtful one. He respected his leaders, trusted his team with a faith that was almost spiritual, and executed every order with the same unwavering sense of duty he'd been raised with. His unit was his family. Captain James Reed was the father figure, a man in his late 40s with a voice that could command a room and a smile that never quite reached his cold, calculating eyes. He talked a good game about honor and the soldier's creed, but Alex had started to notice the cracks in the facade. Reed was a man who enjoyed power, the kind that was absolute and unchallenged. He cut corners on supply requisitions, fudged after-action reports to make his command look more effective, and showed a particular cruelty toward the local populace that made Alex's stomach twist. But Alex, wanting to believe in the chain of command, chalked it up to the pressures of leadership. Then there was Sergeant Vince Dawson. Where Reed was cold steel, Dawson was a rusty blade. He had a grin too wide, too smug, and a moral compass that spun wildly, pointing wherever the money or the advantage was. The rumors around him were an open secret among the enlisted men. Stolen supplies that fell off a truck, shady deals with local interpreters, side arrangements no soldier should ever entertain. Dawson was the kind of man who profited from the war, while men like Alex fought it. Yet, Alex overlooked it. He shared meals with these men, shared fears during midnight mortar attacks, shared memories of home. He convinced himself that the stress of combat amplified their flaws. He didn't want to believe that such rot could exist in the very group he'd sworn to protect with his life. He didn't want to believe betrayal was even a possibility. But sometimes the people you trust the most begin writing your downfall long before you ever see the chapter coming. They draft it in whispers after lights out, in glances exchanged over maps, in the silent language of those who have already decided you are expendable. It was supposed to be a standard recon mission. The briefing was held late at night, the command tent illuminated by a single harsh lantern that cast long, dancing shadows. Captain Reed stood before the map, his pointer tapping a valley deep in contested territory. Objective in and out. Surveillance on suspected supply routes. We move at 0400. Simple. Simple. Alex repeated that word to himself like a mantra as he checked and rechecked his gear later that night. His M4 cleaned and oiled. His ammo evenly distributed. His comms fully charged. His medical kit stocked. Yet, his instincts, honed by 3 tours in this unforgiving land, were screaming. A low, persistent hum of wrongness. It was a feeling he'd learned never to ignore. The kind of chill you get when a storm is gathering on the horizon, but the sky directly above is still deceptively clear. He tried to shake it off. He looked around at the shadowed faces of his team, men he'd laughed with, men he'd dragged to safety. He trusted them. It was the one thing he had never questioned. But the team didn't trust him. Or rather, they no longer needed him. The plan had been set in motion days before. The details were chilling in their simplicity. Reed would direct Alex toward a specific grid coordinate based on falsified intelligence, deliberately isolating him from the main force. Dawson, the comms specialist, would ensure Alex's radio malfunctioned at the critical moment. A technical glitch, easily explained away. And the rest of the unit, under Reed's orders, would execute a tactical withdrawal, citing overwhelming enemy contact. It would look, to any investigator, like Alex had simply fallen behind, a tragic but standard casualty of a high-risk mission. Another name on a wall. Another letter to a family. Alex would never make it home to ask inconvenient questions. The morning of the mission arrived wrapped in a strange, suffocating stillness. The usual pre-op banter was absent, replaced by a tense silence. As they moved out, the only sounds were the crunch of boots on gravel and the rhythmic rustle of their gear. The sun rose, a blood-orange disk behind the jagged ridges, and a cold, cutting wind snaked through the valley, whipping dust into their eyes. Alex moved in formation, his senses on high alert, his eyes constantly scanning the high ground. Then something caught his expert eye. A cluster of footprints too fresh and too deliberate for a goat path. A recently broken branch, its sap still wet. A faint metallic glint from a cliff face where there should have been only rock. His instinct screamed ambush. "Reed, this is Carter," he whispered into his comms, his voice tight. "I've got signs of recent activity on the eastern ridge. Advise we alter course." Static hissed back at him. Not the empty static of dead air, but the distinctive, scrambled hiss of a jammed signal. "Dawson, you reading me? My comms are frizzing. Check your end." More static, this time broken by a sharp pop. A cold dread began to pool in his gut. "Team, anyone copy? I'm seeing movement." Nothing. Then the world exploded. The first rocket-propelled grenade slammed into the ground 10 yards to his left, the concussive blast hurling him through the air. He landed hard, his breath knocked from his lungs. Then the machine gun fire erupted, stitching the ground around him, the sharp crack of rounds passing inches from his head. He felt a searing hot pain in his arm as shrapnel tore through his sleeve, and a moment later, a white-hot agony bloomed in his thigh as a larger piece embedded itself deep in the muscle. Gritting his teeth against a scream, Alex used the last of his momentum to dive behind a large, weathered rock. He fumbled for his comms, his hands slick with blood. He switched frequencies, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "Mayday! Mayday! This is Carter. I'm hit. My position is compromised. I need immediate support. Does anyone copy?" For a moment, there was nothing but the ringing in his ears and the relentless gunfire. Then, faintly, as if a microphone had been accidentally keyed and quickly muted, he heard it. Dawson's voice, cold and utterly devoid of emotion. "He's done. They've got him bracketed. Let's move before they cut us off, too." And then Reed's voice, sharp, final, and chillingly calm. "Confirm that. Leave him. Fall back to extraction point Bravo. That's an order." Alex froze. The words didn't compute at first. They were a foreign language, nonsensical and cruel. "Leave him." He lifted his head, pain screaming from his leg, and peered over the rock. Through the haze of dust and smoke, He saw the last of his team, the men he had called brothers, retreating swiftly and efficiently across the far ridge. Their silhouettes grew smaller, more indistinct, and then disappeared completely. He was alone, surrounded, bleeding out, betrayed. In that single cataclysmic moment, something fundamental inside Alex Carter shattered. It wasn't just his trust. It was the very framework of his identity, the core belief that had sustained him through everything. The break was so profound, so total, he felt a piece of his soul tear loose and drift away into the harsh, uncaring air. The hours that followed were a blur of agony and despair. The initial adrenaline faded, leaving only the raw, throbbing pain in his leg and the deeper, more paralyzing wound in his spirit. He tried to crawl, dragging his useless leg behind him, each movement a fresh exercise in torment. The sun, now high and merciless, baked him, leaching the moisture from his body. His tongue swelled in his mouth, a dry piece of leather. His canteen had been punctured in the blast. Why? The question echoed in his skull, a torturous loop. What had he done? Had he seen something he shouldn't have? Asked a question that was too pointed? Was it simply that his integrity was an inconvenience to Reed and Dawson's corruption? He was a loose end, he realized with sickening clarity. A man easier to eliminate in the fog of war than to silence through other Messier means. By nightfall, the cold was a physical assault. The desert heat vanished, replaced by a chill that seeped into his bones, making his teeth chatter uncontrollably. He was shivering, lightheaded, his vision swimming with dark spots. He knew he was dying. Through the haze he spotted a dark shape against the lighter darkness of the landscape. An old, decaying shepherd's shed, its roof half collapsed, nestled against a grove of skeletal trees like a forgotten memory. Using the last dregs of his strength, he crawled towards it, collapsing just inside the doorway, his body racked with tremors. He lay on the cold, packed dirt, his breath pluming in the frigid air, certain this anonymous, ruined hut was his tomb. He closed his eyes, surrendering to the inevitable. And then a sound. Soft, cautious, organic. Not the scuttle of a scorpion or the whisper of the wind. A low, questioning whine. Alex forced his eyes open, expecting a jackal or a feral dog drawn by the scent of blood. But what he saw wasn't aggressive or predatory. Standing just inside the doorway, silhouetted by the faint starlight, was a dog. It was painfully thin, its ribs and hip bones starkly visible beneath patchy, matted fur of an indeterminate tan color. One ear was torn, a permanent notch taken out of it, and the other lay flat against its skull in fear. Its tail was tucked so far between its legs it was almost invisible. But its eyes were large and intelligent, and in them Alex saw not hunger, but a deep, resonant wariness. It was studying him, the way one broken soul recognizes the fractures in another. The dog took a hesitant step closer, its paws making no sound on the dirt floor. Then another. Its nostrils flared, taking in his scent, blood, sweat, fear. "Hey you," Alex whispered, his voice a dry, cracked ruin. I'm not gonna hurt you." The dog paused, its entire body tense. Its ribs rose and fell with fast, shallow breaths. And then Alex's gaze, sharpened by years of observation, caught a detail that broke his heart all over again. Around its neck was a collar, cheap, faux leather, torn and frayed, hanging on by a single thread of stitching. It was a collar that had once belonged to someone who had put it on this animal promising care, and then had discarded it, left it to fend for itself in this wasteland. Just like him. "Someone hurt you too, didn't they, boy?" he murmured, the words costing him dearly. The dog seemed to understand the tone, if not the words. It blinked slowly, a gesture of non-aggression in the canine world. Then it took the final steps, closing the distance, and gently, hesitantly, pressed its cold, wet nose against Alex's blood-caked, trembling hand. The contact was electric. It was a spark of life in the crushing void of his isolation. It was gentle. It was cautious. But it was undeniably deliberate. A connection offered. Alex exhaled a breath he felt he'd been holding for a lifetime. A single hot tear escaped the corner of his eye, tracing a clean path through the grime on his cheek. For the first time since the ambush, since the betrayal, he did not feel completely and utterly alone. You want me to follow you?" Alex whispered, the idea seeming both ludicrous and like his only possible hope. The dog wagged its tail once, a slow, deliberate movement, not with the joy of a pet, but with the certainty of a guide who knew a path. It was a leap of faith, the only one left to him. Gritting his teeth until his jaw ached, Alex used the wall to haul himself upright, distributing his weight onto his good leg. He took a lurching step, then another, his breath hissing through his teeth. The dog waited patiently, then moved forward again, setting a slow, deliberate pace, pausing every few yards to ensure Alex was still following. And so began their painful pilgrimage. The dog, whom Alex had started to think of as Scout in his mind, led him away from the open valleys and into the deeper, more rugged woodlands that clung to the mountainsides. Over the next several days, a bond formed that defied language and species. It was a wordless pact of the wounded. Scout became his eyes and ears. Alex learned to read the animal's every signal. A tail held high and stiff meant immediate danger, often a patrol or a lookout post. A slow, relaxed walk meant the path was clear, at least for now. A quick, darting movement forward, followed by a look back, often meant he had found something. A patch of edible berries Alex recognized, a small, hidden stream where he could refill his canteen, which he'd patched with a piece of plastic and tape, or the grisly remains of a small animal kill from which Alex, swallowing his revulsion, could take scraps of meat. He shared his findings with a generosity that humbled Alex. One evening, after Alex had collapsed from pain and hunger, Scout disappeared for nearly an hour. He returned, dragging the hind leg of a wild goat, dropping it gently beside Alex before retreating a few steps, as if to say, "This is for you. You're saving my life," Alex choked out, tears of gratitude and weakness stinging his eyes. He used his knife to cut a strip of meat, chewing it slowly. It was tough and gamey, but it was sustenance. The dog simply lay down beside him, resting its head carefully on Alex's injured thigh, its body heat providing a small measure of comfort against the swelling and infection Alex knew was setting in. It was a guard dog, a nurse, and a companion all in one. In these moments, huddled together in shallow caves or beneath dense thickets, the searing pain of betrayal began to soften, ever so slightly. It was replaced by something fragile, something he hadn't dared to hope for: trust. Not the blind trust of a soldier for his command, but the hard-earned, unspoken trust between two beings whose survival depended entirely on one another. On the 5th day, their luck nearly ran out. Alex was moving better, having fashioned a crude crutch from a sturdy branch, but he was weak, feverish, and his leg was a swollen, angry mess of purple and red. Scout was leading him along a narrow, rocky ravine, a path that offered cover but was dangerously confined. They heard it at the same time, the crunch of boots on loose stone. Not one pair, but several, and the murmur of voices speaking in the local dialect. Enemy patrol. Scout froze instantly, his entire body rigid. His ears pinned back flat against his skull, and the low growl started deep in his chest, a vibration Alex could feel through the air. Alex held his breath, his heart hammering against his ribs so loudly he was sure the patrol could hear it. He shuffled backward, pressing himself into a shallow recess in the ravine wall, a tangle of roots and shadow offering meager cover. The footsteps grew closer. He could hear the men laughing, the clink of their gear. One of them, a man with a thick black beard and a scar over his eye, stopped mere feet from Alex's hiding place. He scanned the ravine, his Kalashnikov held loosely. His eyes passed over the recess, lingered for a heart-stopping second, then moved on. He was about to turn away when Scout, pressed against Alex's side, let his growl escalate, a low, menacing rumble that was barely audible but enough. The soldier's head snapped back. His eyes narrowed, and he took a step toward the recess, raising his weapon. Alex's blood ran cold. He acted on pure instinct. He dropped his hand from his crutch and placed it firmly on Scout's head, pressing down. "Please," he breathed, the word a silent prayer. Stay quiet. For both our sake. He felt the dog's muscles quiver with tension, the growl dying in its throat. Scout stopped growling. He stopped breathing. He became a statue, his eyes fixed on the soldier, but he yielded to Alex's touch. The enemy soldier stood there listening, his head cocked. The seconds stretched into an eternity. Alex could see the pores on the man's nose, the dirt under his fingernails. He prayed the man wouldn't see the faint glint of his dog tags or the unnatural shape of his boot in the shadows. Finally, with a grunt, the soldier turned and barked something to his comrades. The group moved on, their footsteps and voices fading slowly down the ravine. Alex didn't move for a full minute after the last sound had disappeared. Then he slumped against the rock, his body trembling with spent adrenaline, his chest heaving. He looked down at Scout, who was still tense, still watching the path. "You," Alex whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved me. Again." The dog relaxed its posture and turned, nuzzling its wet nose into Alex's neck with a soft whimper, as if to say, "I was scared too." They continued their journey after that, but something had shifted. They were no longer a soldier and a stray dog. They were a single entity, a team forged in the fires of shared peril. They moved with a new synchronicity, a silent communication that required no words. Alex found himself talking to the dog, not in the silly way people talk to pets, but in earnest, quiet conversations. He told him about his father, his brother Michael, his hometown with its wide, tree-lined streets. He talked about the betrayal, the acid-like burn of Reed's words. "Leave him." Scout would listen, his head cocked, his intelligent eyes fixed on Alex's face, absorbing the pain and offering silent absolution. By the 7th day, Alex was at the end of his endurance. The fever had a firm grip on him, sending shivers through his body even in the midday heat. His leg was a log of fiery pain, and the world swam in and out of focus in a nauseating blur. He was running on sheer stubborn will, a will that was being steadily eroded by infection and starvation. Scout, however, never wavered. He stayed close, his body a constant warm pressure against Alex's good leg, his presence a tether to consciousness. At dawn on the 8th day, Scout became unusually agitated. He nudged Alex awake with more insistence than usual, whining softly. When Alex managed to sit up, the dog sprinted a few yards ahead, then raced back, barking sharply, his tail held high and wagging in a frantic, excited motion Alex had never seen before. "What is it, boy?" Alex muttered, his voice a ghost of itself. "What did you find?" Scout barked again, a sound of pure excitement, and ran forward, pausing on a small rise ahead, his entire body quivering with anticipation. Summoning the last dregs of his strength, fueled by a faint, desperate spark of hope, Alex pushed himself up on his crutch and hobbled forward. Each step was agony. He reached the base of the rise and, using his hands and one good leg, hauled himself up the steep incline. He collapsed at the top, his chest heaving. He lifted his head, his vision swimming. And there it was. Just across the next valley, nestled in a protective bowl of land, was a sight more beautiful than any he had ever seen. A U.S. forward operating base. The familiar geometric pattern of HESCO barriers, the Humvees parked in neat rows, the American flag, a tiny distant splash of red, white, and blue snapping in the wind. The sounds of generators were a faint, mechanical symphony. Home. A sob tore from Alex's throat, a raw, unstoppable sound of relief and disbelief. The tears came then, not of pain but of deliverance. "We made it," he wept, wrapping his arms around Scout's neck, burying his face in the dog's now familiar musky fur. "You did it. You brilliant, amazing dog. You got me home." Scout pressed his forehead hard into Alex's chest, letting out a series of soft, high-pitched whines, licking the tears from his face. He knew. He understood the significance of this place. Gathering every last ounce of his will, Alex began the final torturous descent into the valley and the slow, agonizing climb toward the base's main gate. He was a specter, a ghost of a soldier, covered in filth and blood, leaning on a stick, followed by a skinny, ragged dog. When the guards on the watchtower spotted the shambling figure approaching, the reaction was immediate and professional. Shouts rang out. A squad of soldiers, weapons at the ready, sprinted out to meet him. As they drew closer, their expressions shifted from alertness to shock and horror. "Medic!" one of them yelled. "We've got a friendly." "I repeat, we have a friendly." Alex's legs gave way just as they reached him. Strong hands caught him, lowering him gently to the ground. The world was fading in and out, sounds becoming muffled and distant. He felt hands probing his wounds, a blood pressure cuff on his arm, and 4 being started. But through it all, he kept one hand fisted tightly in Scout's fur. When a burly sergeant tried to shoo the dog away, to clear the area for the medics, Scout snarled, a fierce, protective sound, baring his teeth and planting himself between the soldiers and Alex. "Whoa, easy boy," the sergeant said, stepping back in surprise. Alex forced his eyes open, the world a blur of green uniforms and concerned faces. He focused on the medic leaning over him. "No," he croaked, his voice a dry rasp. He tightened his grip on the dog's scruff. "He's with me." The medics exchanged uncertain glances. Protocol was clear. Stray animals were a health risk, a security liability. But something in Alex's voice, the broken, raw, absolute determination, cut through the regulations. This wasn't a request. It was a statement of fact. The dog was part of the package. One of the medics, a young woman with kind eyes, nodded. "All right, Sergeant. He's with you. Let's get you both out of here." And so as Alex was loaded onto a stretcher and carried toward a waiting Black Hawk helicopter, a skinny, terrified, but loyal stray dog walked right beside him, his head held high. Man and dog left the valley of betrayal together, the thumping of the helicopter blades a drumbeat of their deliverance. Alive. Together. Unbroken. The world that came back to Alex was one of sterile white, the beep of monitors, and the dull ache of surgically repaired wounds. He was in a military hospital in Germany. The first thing he saw when he woke properly was Scout, clean bathed, his tan fur fluffed and soft, a brand new blue collar around his neck, lying on a blanket beside his bed, chomping contentedly on a large rawhide bone. A young private had been assigned to watch him and was grinning from ear to ear. The investigation was swift and merciless. Once Alex was lucid enough, he told his story to stone-faced agents from the Army CID. He told them everything. The suspicious mission briefing, the deliberate comms failure, the overheard voices, the calculated abandonment. He provided grid coordinates, timestamps, and the names of every man in his unit. The evidence was damning. The malfunctioning comms unit was found to have been tampered with. The intel Reed had acted on was traced back to a source Dawson had personally vouched for. A source later revealed to be completely fabricated. The story Reed and Dawson tried to spin, that Alex had been a reckless loner who disobeyed orders, collapsed under the weight of his flawless service record and the testimonies of other soldiers who had begun to come forward with their own stories of Reed's corruption and Dawson's shady dealings. Captain James Reed was stripped of his command, court-martialed, and sentenced to 20 years at Leavenworth for dereliction of duty, conspiracy, and attempted murder. Sergeant Vince Dawson and 2 other conspirators faced similar fates, their military careers ending in disgrace and federal prison. Their excuse, when finally offered, was as pathetic as it was cruel. They claimed Alex would have slowed them down, that he asked too many questions, that the success of the mission was more important than one man. But juries and the American public have no tolerance for soldiers who betray their own. They were branded as cowards, and justice was served with a cold, satisfying finality. Alex received medals, a Purple Heart for his wounds, a Bronze Star for valor for his extraordinary heroism and survival against impossible odds. High-ranking officers came to his bedside, offering handshakes and apologies for the failure in the ranks. None of it mattered to him as much as one single quiet moment. The day the doctors cleared him to take a short walk, he was wheeled out into the hospital's courtyard. The German sun was warm on his face. A nurse brought Scout out to him. The dog, spotting Alex, froze for a second, his tail starting to wag so hard his entire body wriggled. Then he launched himself forward, leaping into Alex's lap, covering his face in happy, slobbery kisses, whining and yipping with joy. Alex laughed, a real deep heartfelt laugh, the kind he thought had been killed in that dusty valley. He buried his face in the dog's clean fur, holding him tight. "That's it," he whispered. "No more leaving. Ever." He named him Valor, because he now knew that courage doesn't always come with a rank and a uniform. Sometimes it comes on 4 quiet feet, with a wounded heart and a will to protect that goes deeper than any instinct, a loyalty purer than any oath. Alex returned to the United States months later, a different man than the one who had deployed. He was healed physically, the scars on his leg and arm a permanent map of his ordeal. But the deeper, emotional scars were the ones that required more time. The betrayal had left a permanent shadow, a caution in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Valor was his anchor. The dog, officially adopted through a special military program that made him a certified therapy animal, became more than a pet. He was a lifeline. Together they built a new life, a world defined not by duty to a flawed institution, but by loyalty to each other. They went for morning runs through quiet suburban neighborhoods, Alex's stride strong again, Valor loping happily beside him. They took long walks in the park, where Valor would chase squirrels with a joy that was infectious, his past suffering seemingly forgotten. At night he refused to sleep anywhere except at the foot of Alex's bed, a warm living weight that kept the nightmares at bay. Alex attended therapy sessions for his PTSD, and Valor would sit patiently beside him, his head on Alex's knee, his calm presence often doing more than any words could. Neighbors adored the gentle, well-mannered dog. Children flocked to him in the park, and he would tolerate their pats with a patient sigh. Other veterans, seeing the two of them together, would often nod in silent understanding, recognizing the unspoken bond, the shared history of visible and invisible wounds. And Alex? He never forgot the truth. In the darkest moment of his life, when the men he trusted had left him to die, a stray dog, abandoned and broken just like him, had chosen to stay. He had chosen to share his food, to stand guard, to lead him home. Not for a reward, not out of duty, but because some hearts, no matter how scarred, how battered, how betrayed, still possess an infinite capacity for love. People often asked Alex how he survived, how he crawled through miles of enemy territory with a wound that should have been fatal, how he evaded patrols and ambushes, how he found the strength to keep going when everything and everyone had been taken from him. And every time Alex would give the same simple, honest answer: "I didn't survive alone." Then he'd look at Valor, the dog who once had nothing, now curled contentedly at his feet, safe and loved, and a soft, peaceful smile would touch his lips. "He saved me. And I saved him. We healed each other." Because sometimes, life gives you the family you never knew you needed. The family that finds you in the darkness. The family that walks into your life on 4 paws when everyone else on 2 has walked away. And in the quiet moments, when Valor's head rests heavily on his lap and a gentle evening breeze drifts through the open window, Alex Carter knows one thing with absolute, unshakable certainty. Betrayal had nearly killed him. But love, pure, loyal, unconditional love, had saved him. And that made all the difference.